Rome, the Eternal City. A place built by emperors of iron and blood. Yet among them rose a child, a boy no older than 16, whose reign would stain the empire with a madness unlike anything seen before. He was called Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, but history remembers him by another name, Elagabalus. The boy emperor who turned Rome's temples into theaters of lust. Who mocked the Senate, spat on the gods of his people, and drenched altars in blood not fit for sacrifice. He was not just an emperor. He was a nightmare in silk robes, crowned high priest of chaos. Imagine a world where priests danced naked in the temples, where sacrifices were not of beasts but of men, where the emperor himself sought to be both bride and groom in ceremonies that mocked the sacred. Rome trembled, not from foreign invaders, but from the decadence festering within its own palace walls. And yet, this is not just a story of one wicked boy. It is the story of a civilization on the edge, where faith, power, and desire collided in a storm of orgies and blood. Elagabalus was not merely a ruler. He was a warning, a shadow cast over history. Before we go deeper, let me warn you, history is full of forgotten stories like this one. If you don't subscribe, you'll miss the next tale, and risk letting centuries of blood-soaked truths slip into silence. Don't be the one who ignores the past. By the early 3rd century, Rome was an empire divided by fear. Emperors rose and fell in the blink of an eye, soldiers murdered their generals, and civil wars erupted like storms across the Mediterranean. The mighty empire of Augustus and Trajan was crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. Power no longer rested in wisdom or tradition, it belonged to whoever could command the loyalty of an army. And in this world of betrayal and ambition, one family of women, plotting, whispering in the shadows, would place a boy upon the throne. That boy was Elagabalus. Elagabalus was not Roman by heart. He was Syrian, born in the city of Emesa, where his family held the priesthood of an alien god, a black meteorite worshipped as the embodiment of the sun. To his people, he was not just a child. He was the chosen high priest of the unconquerable sun god, Elagabal. And soon, Rome itself would be forced to kneel before this foreign deity. But how does a boy from a distant temple seize the greatest throne in the world? The answer is as old as Rome itself: blood, manipulation, and ambition. Elagabalus did not simply arrive in Rome. He came bearing his god. In his retinue traveled the black, conical stone, the sacred beetle of Elagabal, pulled from its shrine in Emesa, wrapped in cloth, enthroned in its own palanquin. He would not defer to Jupiter. He would replace him. His arrival was a spectacle. He dressed not as a typical Roman emperor, but as a god's high priest, robes of purple and gold, jewels gleaming. He was both sovereign and sacrificial. Sources tell us he forced senators to stand and watch as he danced around his altar to drums and cymbals. With shock across Rome, the Senate learned that the new emperor would act as Pontifex Maximus not just for Rome's gods, but for his foreign sun god. And so, from the moment of entry, he asserted, he was not just ruler. He was the mouthpiece of a new cosmic order. Behold, Rome, I bring you the stone of heaven. Kneel to it. Elagabal had long been worshipped in Emesa as Elagabal, god of the mountain, a sun deity enthroned in a conical stone, draped in mystery and Eastern ritual. The cult was familiar in Syria and surrounding lands, but alien to Rome. Yet the boy emperor forced the issue. He built a grand temple on the Palatine Hill, dedicated to Elagabal. This edifice, the Elagabalium, would become the spiritual core of his reign. He transferred sacred relics from Rome's old gods, the eternal fire of Vesta, the shields of the Salii, even the Palladium, into his new temple, symbolically subordinating all divinity to his sun cult. He did not merely permit his worship. He demanded it. Senators, priests, magistrates, all were forced to attend processions, listen to foreign hymns, respect sacrifices made to Elagabal as the supreme deity. He conflated Elagabal with Rome's sun deity Sol. He styled himself Sacerdos Amplissimus Elagabali, the highest priest of Elagabal. In other words, he ruled not just men, but the heavens. During his solstice festivals, he placed the black stone on a richly adorned chariot and paraded it through Rome, distributing food to masses, free bread and grain, to gain popular favor. These festivals dazzled but also humiliated traditional religion. And the senators found themselves stripped of dignity before foreign rites. Rome was no longer simply an empire. It would become a temple under a sun from the east. If the new cult was one way to shock Rome, marriage was the other. Elagabalus took a Vestal virgin, Aquilia Severa, as wife. This act was more than defiant. It was sacrilegious. The Vestals, sacred guardians of Rome's eternal flame, were sworn to virginity for 30 years under penalty of death. By marrying one, Elagabalus desecrated centuries of religious code. He defended it publicly. In his eyes, the marriage mirrored a sacred union between his God and Rome. He claimed this bond would sanctify the city through his foreign son. He later divorced her and took other spouses, but the shock, the violation of convention, had already sent tremors through Rome. At the same time, his personal life became absurdly public. He allegedly took male lovers, dressed in feminine garb, wore makeup and wigs, and expressed desires that blurred gender norms. Ancient sources accuse him of offering high rewards if someone would let him undergo a gender change so he could marry his favorite, Hierocles, a charioteer. Whether these accounts are accurate or exaggerated matters less. In Rome's reaction, the aristocracy recoiled, the people gossiped, and the Senate simmered with contempt. Not everyone bowed. The old guard, the Senate, conservative priests, they seethed. To them, this was not reform but sacrilege. To let one god extinguish Jupiter was treason to Rome's soul. Some cities and provinces resisted. Pagan cults, local traditions, temples of Diana, Mars, Minerva, all resented being sidelined. Some refused to send their relics to the Elagabalium. The Senate itself petitioned, complained, pleaded. But Elagabalus, backed by his mother and grandmother, especially Julia Misa, responded with draconian authority. He removed opponents from office, humiliated magistrates, and replaced them with loyalists distinguished by beauty, foreign origin, or exotic talent. He further attempted to merge Roman gods with his sun cult, declaring that Urania, Minerva, even the goddess Astarte, from Syrian tradition, were consorts or aspects of Elagabal. Thus no deity could stand wholly independent. He sanctioned that all sacred images, even those of Vestal, of Vesta's flame, be transferred to his temple. The eternal flame might be extinguished. The effect, Rome's religious order was uprooted. Power no longer lay in tradition. It lay in the arbitrary will of a boy king. Behind the pageantry, internal fractures took shape. Julia Misa, always the power player, watched her grandson's excesses with both pride and fear. She had placed him on the throne. She could not watch him destroy it. Some loyalists preached moderation. Tutors, generals, even a figure named Gannes was said to have demanded curbs on the worst of Elagabalus's whims. But Elagabalus would not be restrained. He ordered the execution of Gannes and other dissenters, cutting off the hands that had propped him up. He also moved against senators, humiliating them, confiscating property, and rewarding favorites of scandalous or obscure birth. This alienated Rome's elite. His cruelty sharpened. Ancient writers speak of guests crushed by petals at banquets, blood mixed with wine for sacrifices, grotesque entertainments meant to shock or break taboos. Public piety became public horror. The emperor who danced naked at altars, who took a Vestal as bride, who commanded all gods bow before his son, Rome braced for storm. When a boy becomes emperor, the throne weighs heavier than flesh. But Elagabalus did not seek to control his throne, he sought to perform it. He did not merely receive honors. He danced them. Cassius Dio reports that in public ceremonies, even while walking or delivering a speech, he would perform dances, perhaps to mock tradition or to project that he lived by the will of his god. He frequently reclined when accepting salutations, adopting languid, effeminate postures that broke entirely with Roman expectations of imperial gravitas. He painted his eyes with lead and alkanet, used cosmetics, plucked his beard or shaved, and sometimes wore a hairnet. Some sources say he plucked all his body hair, a procedure so total it would be nearly ritualistic. He sometimes appeared in the guise of a woman, according to Dio, performing roles of bride, mistress, or queen, and even being called wife in relation to his lovers. One anecdote says that he presented himself in forms that merged masculine and feminine aspects, so that in some rituals or spectacles, the lines of gender blurred. These theatrical excesses were not purely aesthetic. They proclaimed a message: the emperor was beyond convention. He rejected the gravitas of Roman virtue and embraced a new sacrificial identity, part priest, part performer. If his body was spectacle, his loves were public drama. No corner of the court was safe from rumor, or from desire. Among the most infamous of his favorites was Hierocles, a charioteer of Carian origin, whose beauty captivated Elagabalus. Cassius Dio claims that Hierocles rose from slave to near equal in power. His mother, once a slave, was elevated to a status among the wives of ex-consuls. In one famous anecdote, Hierocles allegedly drugged a rival lover, Aurelius Zodicus, making him impotent, thereby eliminating him from favor. Dio even records that Elagabalus once took the role of wife and had Hierocles beat him in a mock, caught-in-the-act scenario, in which Elagabalus seemed to delight in humiliation. Elagabalus's partiality to such romances offended the army, the Senate, and even his own supporters. Many believed he placed carnal indulgence above duty. In some versions, Hierocles' influence began to rival that of the emperor himself, deeply disturbing in Rome's power structure. Elagabalus used spectacle not only in clothes and flesh, but in cruelty. One of the most oft-cited stories: at lavish feasts, he ordered the ceiling of a banquet hall rigged so that innumerable petals would rain down, so many that guests were suffocated beneath them. Sometimes he held naumachii, mock sea battles, in basins flooded with wine red like blood, rather than water, as a kind of grotesque echo of tragedy. He is said to have torn into the normal boundaries of sacrifice, mixing it with cruelty and spectacle. Whether human sacrifice truly occurred is debated, but ancient sources allege his festivals were stained with blood. He might have built a brothel inside the palace, open to slaves, guests, and courtiers. Some sources claim he prostituted himself. In his religious innovation, he merged sacrament with perversion. He forced senators and high priests to attend rites of Elagabal personally, displacing older rites. Some ancient accounts allege that he commanded prostitutes, both male and female, into temple rituals. His acts undermined the dignity of the office of emperor in Roman eyes. Where others sought stability, he sought upheaval. When the emperor's decadence infects religion, the empire's soul is in peril. His earlier religious revolution now metastasized into zealotry. Elagabalus continued to force the worship of his black stone above all gods. He transplanted Roman relics, Vesta's flame, the Palladium, the shields of the Salii, into his temple, signaling subjugation of all divine symbols to his solar cult. He attempted to fuse his cult with aspects of Roman deities, making Elagabal consort to Minerva, Urania, or other Roman gods, thus seeking to make resistance absurd. Winter rituals, processions, sacrifices, he demanded attendance from all ranks. The Senate, priests, even Jewish or Samaritan communities were ordered to submit or shift their rites to his Palatine cult. Yet opposition simmered. Some traditional priesthood secretly resisted. Excess breeds enemies. Madness demands sacrifice. And in the twilight of his reign, even those who raised him turned against him. Julia Misa, the grandmother and mastermind behind his ascent, gradually lost patience with his excesses. She began to consider an alternative successor, his cousin Severus Alexander, whose demeanor promised stability. Elagabalus's paranoia escalated. He suspected conspiracies everywhere. He attempted to murder Alexander, alienating the Praetorian Guard and making enemies of his own kin. He dismissed loyalists. He executed Gannes early in his reign, believed to be for urging moderation or resisting his worst whims. Some senators and courtiers plotted quietly. The Praetorian Guard, increasingly disgusted and fearing for their own safety, shifted their loyalties. Desperate, Elagabalus stashed poisons, swords, and even planned his own dramatic death should he be cornered. Some sources say he placed gilded towers or prepared ropes and jewels so that if he were besieged, he could make a spectacle even in death. He tried to cling to hierarchs, demanding that the guard spare him for his lover, but the guard would not yield. For 4 years, Rome endured Elagabalus's orgies, sacrifices, and blasphemies. But no empire bows forever. In the shadows of the Palatine, whispers grew louder, weaving themselves into a rope strong enough to hang a god. Julia Maesa, the matriarch who had once lifted him onto the throne, now recoiled from his chaos. Rome teetered on revolt. Senators mocked in silence, soldiers fumed, citizens prayed for relief. And so, Maesa devised a new plan, to present her other grandson, Severus Alexander, as Rome's salvation. But it was not done openly. Alexander was groomed quietly, his virtues emphasized, restraint, discipline, modesty, the anti-Elagabalus. In March of 222, the Guard openly declared loyalty to Severus Alexander. Elagabalus, frantic, rushed to their camp, dragging the boy with him. He demanded their allegiance, parading Alexander like a hostage. But the Praetorians turned cold eyes upon him. Murmurs spread, "We want Alexander. Not this mockery." He ordered Alexander executed on the spot, but the soldiers refused. Some reports say they even laughed in his face. Imagine, the Emperor of Rome, humiliated by his own guards, denied the right to kill a rival. Power bled from his hands, faster than any vein could spill. The Praetorians chose rebellion. Cornered, terrified, the boy god ran, not to temples, not to his priests, but to his mother's arms. The guard stormed the palace. Elagabalus and his mother Julia Soaemias attempted to hide in a chest, or perhaps in a latrine, but hiding could not save them. They were dragged into the light. The emperor pleaded, screamed, perhaps even tried to command them in the name of his god. But the soldiers no longer heard their emperor, only a disgraced child. They slaughtered his attendants. They struck him down, stabbed, strangled, beaten. Some accounts say he was butchered like an animal, begging as his mother was killed beside him. Thus ended the reign of Elagabalus, not with divine fire, but with soldiers' fists and blades, in filth and fear. But his humiliation did not end in death. The Praetorians stripped him naked, mutilated his corpse, and dragged it through the streets of Rome. People spat, mocked, hurled filth. The boy who had once dressed as a goddess now lay as carrion for dogs. Finally, his broken body was hurled into the Tiber, denied a grave, denied remembrance. His memory was cursed with damnatio memoriae, his name and image erased from monuments, his existence condemned to silence. Elagabalus had crowned himself god. Rome crowned him monster. And in the cold waters of the river, the boy who wanted to be eternal was forgotten, except as a warning. When the boy god lay dead in the mud, Rome did not weep. The soldiers turned at once to his cousin, Severus Alexander, a boy as well, but one molded in the image of Rome's old virtues. Alexander, only 14, was proclaimed emperor in March 222 CE. He was quiet, studious, pious, a stark contrast to Elagabalus's flamboyance. His grandmother Julia Maesa ensured his survival, just as she had orchestrated Elagabalus's rise. But this time, she placed her bets on moderation and stability. Rome sighed with relief. At least for a moment. But in choosing Alexander, Rome was not only choosing stability, it was damning Elagabalus to oblivion. Rome had a ritual for its monsters. Not exile. Not silence. Erasure. The Senate declared damnatio memoriae on Elagabalus. His portraits were smashed. His name was hacked from inscriptions. His likeness stripped from monuments and coins. It was as if Rome sought to delete him from existence. But paradox, by trying to erase him, they immortalized him. The black hole left behind became more fascinating than any marble statue. Much of what we know about Elagabalus comes from hostile sources, Cassius Dio, Herodian, and later the Historia Augusta. These men painted him as a demon in silk, a creature of vice and blasphemy. Was it all true? Perhaps not. Some stories, his prostitution in the palace, his wish for surgery to become a woman, his drowning banquets, may have been exaggerations or outright inventions. A smear campaign designed to make Alexander seem all the more virtuous. Was Elagabalus truly Rome's most wicked emperor? Or was he simply too foreign, too young, too strange to survive the old order? Whatever the truth, Elagabalus became a symbol of decadence, of decline, of an empire that could no longer tell where its gods ended and its monsters began. Later historians would call him the false Antoninus, the Syrian boy, the emperor of women and eunuchs. Christian writers used him as a cautionary tale of pagan corruption. Modern scholars debate him as one of the earliest figures in history who may have defied gender norms. To some, he is a tyrant. To others, a tragic youth trapped between worlds. To Rome, he was a nightmare that had to be buried. The tale of Elagabalus warns us of power in the wrong hands. A child, crowned as a god, crushed beneath the weight of a crown he never understood. A city corrupted by its own thirst for spectacle. A family willing to sacrifice blood for survival. Rome tried to erase him. Yet here we are, still speaking his name. Perhaps the true curse of Elagabalus is not that he was forgotten, but that he could never be silenced. 2 centuries of emperors have come and gone. Some celebrated as gods, others cursed as tyrants. But of them all, one boy, Elagabalus, refuses to fade away. Rome burned his name, shattered his face, cast his body in filth. Yet centuries later, we speak of him still. His story clings to history like blood on marble. You can try to wash it clean, but the stain remains. Rome thought it had buried Elagabalus. But Rome itself is dust now. And still, the boy emperor whispers across centuries, I was here. I was power. I was ruin. His empire fell. His temples crumbled. But his warning endures. This tale ends here, but countless more await. Betrayals, executions, crowns slipping into blood, all waiting to be told. Subscribe now, or the next horror, the next tragedy, the next forgotten emperor will pass you by. And when others gather here to speak of it, you'll have nothing to say, except regret. The wicked boy emperor has fallen. But history is far from finished.